Hello, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm very glad that you are in a position to join me on this, in this moment in time. Well, I just read this article that people who can stand on one leg are more likely, or rather people who can't balance. I mean, they started off the article with a negative. Instead of saying people who can stand or balance on one leg are likely to, I don't know. Maybe it is. I think the article is that people who can balance on one leg are likely to live longer. I have a problem with that. Because of course it said people in their middle to late years. Now I'm still not in that stage in my life, but it's still disturbing because it's one of those things you don't want to kind of have at the back of your mind, right? Like when you're trying to do a yoga asana, especially a balancing pose, and suddenly you're like, wait a second, it means that if I don't do this, and it says at least for 10 seconds, if they can't hold it at least for 10 seconds, and I know, okay, maybe people in their 60s and 70s should worry, but I don't like these kinds of research studies or these papers put out because it kind of fucks with your head, man. It's like these soothsayers, these tarot card readers, these numerologists who basically put the fear of your mortality in your mind, and it kind of like, and that's the last thing you want to do yoga. You want in your head to pop into your head when you're doing something like yoga, which is supposed to calm your mind and to bring the unity of breath, body, and mind. And the last thing you need is, wait a second, I can't balance on I can't do the tree pose, I can't do the one-legged pose, which is supposed to be a lot of yoga. And instead of just saying, okay, you know what, I'll work on it and I'll let go and I'll understand the idea of how my body needs to balance, you're like, no, I'm going to die. That's not good. That's not good. So I don't know. I clearly was attracted by the title of the article and I read the article. But did I need to read it? No. Did that need to be in my life or in my mind? No. But it is now, and it's going to play on my mind, and it's a bit bugging, if you ask me, that some person, and these people were in Brazil. I think all the people who did this study, who were participated in the study, were in Brazil. And you know how fucked up it is, right? 2000 and sometime they started the study, and they followed these people for some time. I think some time, and I think they did something with some people. The thing is, as you might know me, I'm not very specific with numbers. I just know the general idea of what I just read. Well, let's just say they conducted this research in a group of people who between the age of and they basically followed these people to figure out. And first of all, it's a time frame which was about 200, I don't know, years, and they followed these people and they basically monitored how many of these people could balance, and then they monitored how many of them popped it. And I'm just like, why would you volunteer for this study? I don't know, people volunteer for fucked up things, dude. They want to be a part of something so desperately that they sign up for things. Some people, of course, they do it because they have someone in their family, like I'm saying, some research, especially cancer research, or they have something with stem cells or something to benefit someone they love who has a problem, or someone they've lost to the problem. But one-legged longevity studies, I don't know how many of you would sign up for that. If someone's like, oh, would you sign up for this? Especially if your balance is shit. Like if your balance is great, like you just be like, excuse me, what does it say about a person who can balance themselves on their nose and on an eyelash and on their member? I just show off as if I could balance. I'd just be like, longevity, I can live forever in this moment in time while I discover the inner depths of my consciousness, and say something, and people will be like, oh, this guy's he's already living. But if I can't balance, I definitely wouldn't volunteer, especially when they have findings like people who can't balance on one leg are more likely to die in the next 10 years when they give something to see. That I remembered. No other numbers I remember, but the 10 years has really stuck with me. Yeah, I get, I wouldn't say it freaks me out. I'm not like scared of, but you don't need this shit in your mind, dude. Like, because it's going to happen. You know it. I know it. We're all going to pop it. And it happens to the best of us, the worst of us, the most composed. And the people who are able to face it are the ones who are able to live life because they're not worrying constantly about their mortality and about leaving this physical vessel we call a human body. So the less you're scared of the final end, you are more willing to enjoy life, as some people put it, and you're supposed to go with that. But when these Brazilian People, can't they just stick with a Brazilian wax or something like that? Like, oh, it takes out your, makes your privates look all nice and shiny, so you can reflect the Amazon back to it. Yeah, that's another dodgy place. But as we found out about the poor explorer, the indigenous protector, and the British journalist Don Phillips, Bruno Pereira, poor guys, man, doing something noble, but clearly in this fucked up world we call planet Earth, one good step and one good deed by a couple of people is counterbalanced, I wouldn't even say, or is countered by the vicious greed and the horrific acts of violence by thousands more. As I said again, numbers. I'm not very compelling with my statistics, but pretty sad, very sad for the family, and it's just a sad situation, as Elton John said. But coming back to these researchers now, while this is happening, people trying to, do conservation of habitats and resources and the Amazon and the jungles and the plants and the animals. There are people balancing on one leg. It's trying to, quite a weird thing we call human experience, right? We have people one side committing horrific crimes, other side you have people trying to figure out how to live longer. It's just fucked up. I don't know. I clearly it's affecting me more than I thought it had when I read the article, but I'm not the best with balancing. I've gotten better, see, because the thing is, some people are like, yeah, it's because your sight is bad and you need to have an anchor point in space so you can look at that, and usually your third eye, or you look between your eyes at the point and you focus. And I do my yoga asanas with my eyes closed, so it's a little harder, obviously, and I don't want excuses. Why are people making excuses for me, and why am I taking up those excuses for myself? I just don't like to study. Yeah, it's not a fun thing to know. It's not a fun fact which you can apply to your life, and unless of course you're one of those people who takes it and says balance is all I need, and you take it in all aspects of itself. I mean, what more can you say when one-legged balance? You can't say one inner balance. That's something I'm working on. Maybe I'll fund a study that says inner balance, especially when it's not very balanced, is good for masculinity, or some fucked up study, and endorse it and get it done and get some. Who do I get for it? I get people from like the Solomon Islands, and I'll track them for all of 20 minutes and say, oh, hey, this study works. So, yeah, highly likely. Anyhow, speaking of balance, and a person who wants to bring balance and in some sense redeem some of what is valuable to humanity, but also to cultures that reside within, of course, is my guest today, Rosa Vásquez Espinoza. She wears a lot of hats. She's a chemical biologist. She's a National Geographic Explorer. She's a keynote speaker. She's an educator. She's a conservationist. And today, she's a conversationist. Well, see what I did there. Rosa is from Peru, from Lima. She's of Peruvian Andean descent, not to be mistaken with Indian. And we have a chat about her work, about the micro Amazon. That's a project she's an initiative to protect the Amazon, of course, in the country where which she calls home, in Peru. And we talk about the various aspects to such a large task that she's taken up, which is protecting something as diverse as the microbiome that is in the Amazon. Many of it is undiscovered. She is specifically also focusing on a species of bee, which she talks about. I don't know the name. That's why I don't come across like I know it. She basically wants to create an environment through restorative practices, through more knowledge, and through the research he does to help in the field of medicine, through these cures that are at the in the Amazon, which are undiscovered, which are so sort of precious for humanity, but at the same time not expose them to exploitation that comes with large corporations. There's so many things that go into this level of work, and it's not one layer, and it's so many opportunities, it's so many layers, it's so many possibilities, it's so many challenges. There's a lot of despair, there's also a lot of hope. There's a lot of work. At the same time, every small step is not measured in seconds or like a TikTok reel, but what you do today takes years to sort of manifest. So we talk about all the things that she's experiencing, she's doing, and the thing that keeps her pushing ahead, and the force that helps her keep her head up high in a situation where sometimes it seems that everything's overwhelming and is against the work you're trying to do. And it's fascinating what she's doing. She's a fantastic human being with a lot of energy and a lot of passion for her work and for the cause of the conservation of the Amazon. I'm really lucky to have had her on the podcast and to have a conversation about everything that she's doing. So I'm sure you'll enjoy the episode. And yeah, I am glad that you've tuned in to the SoapyRao show. As always, thank you very much. If you know someone who'll enjoy this conversation, please do share it with them. And Rosa, if you're listening, thank you very much for joining me on today's episode. And to all of you, I'll catch you on the next one. And till next time, goodbye, God bless, take care of yourselves, and catch you on the other side. Cheers. Rosa Vásquez Espinoza, welcome to the podcast. How are you this, well, morning for you, evening for me?
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Really happy to be here.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Where are you now? Are you in New York at this point?
No, right now I'm in Michigan.
You're in Michigan,
Yeah.
okay. And so I mean, we just met, so I think there's a lot to find out about. So you're originally from Peru, and now you live in, so Michigan, is that on work, or are you based there doing your research?
No, I'm originally from Peru. I was born and raised there really for until I started my undergrad studies. So right now I'm in Michigan, but I'm gonna be relocating a bit more permanently to the UK. But a lot of my work happens in the US and also in Peru. So I'm a little bit with one foot in each. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting for someone like, me being from India, and a lot of people listening right now who may be from, say, the Indian subcontinent, or someone from Asia who always is sort of, aspiring to study in a Western system of undergraduate or postgraduate education, whether it's, whether it's for engineering, whether it's for especially business, but liberal arts is one of those things which is new. But for someone like you from South America, what was the motivation to go to, say, the US or to the UK for your undergrad? And what is the culture when it comes to studying abroad from where you are?
So my degree is in chemical biology, and when I was growing up in Peru, I was fascinated about the science. I didn't know necessarily where I wanted to work, but I knew that I had to start somewhere in a lab. And at that time, I was fascinated with stem cell research, actually, which there was very little happening about that in Peru in terms of science. And I was also intrigued in natural products, but I had not seen that much. That I'm talking, that's like over 10 years ago. Much has changed since, but it was really the lack of even the careers that I was looking for. I was able to speak English at the time already. So I was seeing some degrees that were not available in Peru at the time, but they were in the US and elsewhere, really. I applied to different places, and I kind of went with the one that provided me the best scholarship. But that also would have opportunities to do research as an undergraduate. Yeah.
No, so what's it like? Because I'm sorry, I'm going to act, I am ignorant when it comes to, I haven't been to South America, unfortunately, but even with Peru, everyone who hears about Peru, it's obviously Machu Picchu, and you hear about the tourism catering around that particular site, and about all these various historical significant, things that are related to Peru. But just for someone who calls it home, what's the experience like growing up? Because, I think people, of course, have read now with the internet, about a place, but what's the experience actually being there? Because you hear about your neighboring countries with a lot of positives and negatives, but what's the kind of mindset of a 21st century Peruvian when it comes to, I wouldn't say social progress, but when it comes to conventional jobs or traditional practices? What is there? Are there a lot of people trying out new things, or is it still the same old? Let's get a MBA, get a job. Let's join the corporate. Let's join the IT. Because where I come from, there's been a huge boom over the past 20 years when it comes to information technology, and a lot of companies which are in that space. So that has changed the landscape. A lot more money, a lot more middle class, which is stronger, and as a result, which a lot of good, but also some issues. So on that sort of plane, what's the landscape like over the past, say, 15, 20 years in your city and country?
So that's an very interesting question. And I would say it's a multi-layer answer, mostly because the country is so diverse. Of course, from a geographically perspective, Peru is so special because we have the coast, we have the Andes, and then we have the jungle. You can almost like split the country into three.
Yeah.
But that comes inherently with a very unique set of cultures that have developed over many years, but even like nowadays, and even languages as well. So Quechua and Spanish are the two main languages in the country, but even just in the Amazonian region, we have like tens, if not a bit more, of unique native languages. So all of that come associated with their own practices, culture, religion, and etc. I was born and raised in the city, in Lima, the capital. Yeah. But my entire family comes from either the Andes or closer to the Amazon rainforest. So I grew up super closely related to all of these upbringing, and not just like culturally, as a society, but even within the family, like how do you approach just different things growing up. So I would say nowadays, it really depends where you are. If you are in the capital, you are very closely connected to most of the things that are happening elsewhere. You can think of any big city, really. I would say that something beautiful of the Peruvian culture is that people get adapted really quickly. We have a term that we call mil oficios, which means 1,000 jobs, referring to Peruvians will adapt really quickly. I definitely would say that there's been an increase in IT as well. But I would also say that I think the biggest change that we've seen in the last few years, especially given the pandemic, was a rise in small entrepreneurs, and a lot of them that do also arts as well as wellness, which was not really such a big focus, not from this type of modern perspective as it was before. And when you are in the outer regions outside of the capital, something that I've seen that I'm really excited about is that in the jungle side, more people are getting more access to technology, which is incredible. So you start to get more voices out there in the internet of young people or even older people that want to share their own culture from their own angle, their own perspective, their own voice. And so that adds a whole other layer, not just to education, but also to tourism. So all of a sudden now you're not getting Westerns, coming and telling the story of a local, but you have a local telling that story. And I think that's becoming a very powerful channel in science communication. There's definitely more talks amongst organizations that I've even been part of that want to bring those voices to the light. And I don't think that would have been possible before. And I feel like that also opens a whole new, set of ideas and dreams that people can have, because all of a sudden that's a new career that you perhaps didn't envision having, and that is now a possibility. I also do see an increase in biotechnological research, which wasn't really such a big priority in all levels in the country. I think it was mostly focused on agriculture, which makes sense because most of our economy is based on agriculture. But I think little by little, the country as a whole, regardless of where you are, is starting to realize, oh, wow, the Peru has such an untapped vast of biological richness that hasn't really been explored fully for not just agriculture, but now, talking about restoration, bioremediation of polluted areas, polluted lakes, and using our own local tools to solve local problems.
That's such a, just the three things you mentioned, the main sort of landscape features, which is the mountains, the jungle, and the ocean, right? But, typically when you hear, my geography of South America was very broad brushstrokes, right? You read about the pampas in Argentina, you read about the rivers, the jungle in Brazil, or you read about Venezuela, you read about Chile, and the thing is that South America is for someone like me is so far away. It's almost like a very sort of romantic place, but it's at the same time it's home for someone like you. But it's got so much diversity, right? When it comes to culture, and when it comes to now you're showing through your work, which we'll talk about in a bit, but just the kind of richness when it comes to scientific stuff which is undiscovered, when it comes to minerals, when it comes to historical significance, when it comes to even you go way beyond like any sort of civilized documentation. There's so many things being uncovered right now in regions like South America. But I want to ask you, in a lot of cases, what happened was the information which is put across about a certain country is very colonial in its representation, right? But whoever the settlers were kind of manipulated the information and put it across. But now with the internet, with the power of the tools available and technology, do you sense or do you see a kind of resurgence, if that's the word, or maybe a gathering and momentum of indigenous groups of people kind of trying to find their voice and taking back a lot of what they feel? Because you kind of read this in some places like in the Pacific Islands, or you might read about it in some other places which have this feature where the indigenous people were oppressed, but now you have a lot of the return, if you want to call it, to old cultural practices, to certain languages which were from that past. So is that something which is happening in Peru?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we're seeing a rise in all of that in the last few years. And I think in a way, COVID also propelled that. So one of the first stories I heard of this was a group of 12 to 15 years old getting together and finding a space in the radio. And I'm talking about a remote area in the Amazon rainforest. Sorry, there's some noise outside. And they basically tuning in daily for an hour to speak about what was happening in their own local region and trying to give hope to other kids their own age, and also trying to encourage other younger people to feel proud about their culture. So something that we had seen years ago to start unraveling was that a lot of the younger community members didn't want to be associated to their own cultures. They wanted to go to the capital and basically kind of like get lose, part of all of the cultural heritage that they had in a way, and not even speak those languages or not learn those traditions, and instead just, do Spanish and English, and almost seen as if it was a dissociated, that they needed to get rid of that so that they could have a place in the future and progress economically and intellectually and etc. Of course, not everyone, but it was a big trend. There was a rejection of culture. And you can hear this from a lot of the local, the elderly leaders as well. They were concerned as to who's going to carry on this knowledge, right? A lot of this knowledge is oral communication.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah, a lot of the information is passed on through those practices, right? Yeah.
Right. So we have incredible scientists now that are really trying their best to document all of this knowledge. But most of that has been focused, for example, only on medicinal plants, but not on all the other type of tools, natural sources that people use to treat conditions. So that was happening for a while. And then I feel like in a combination of like what happened with COVID, as well as increased access to internet in some areas, there were a few things that happened. One of them, and I know this from direct interaction with a lot of these communities, was that the younger people realized that the elderly were dying. And that happened everywhere in the world, right? With the pandemic, the lack of access to the vaccines, especially in these areas. But then they realized that they were being left by themselves. And that's something really scary, especially when they noticed that the ones that did still knew and had knowledge about what plants to use for certain conditions could help the elderly, their parents, their grandparents. And thanks to that, a lot of them were able to still manage to survive. We had a lot of losses, like everywhere in the world, but a lot of them kind of saw, like, oh, wow, they're not just telling me about all these things that we can use, but I'm actually seeing how the plant that I have right now in my backyard is literally helping save the life of my grandparents. So I feel like that kind of brought this enhanced sense of feeling proud
Yeah.
of your own resources. And I did hear that there was one plant called matico that became really popular in the jungle to use during COVID times. And a lot of the younger people started to get really motivated and planted it everywhere. And that I think that was
Nice.
kind of like a really cool, almost movement that really took over. And then that, and at the same time, there were a few leaders that became really known, outspoken in the virtual world and social media, especially because they started to show how it is to live in the jungle and trying to make it cool again. Being like, I can still have great progress. I can still build a career. I can still bring income for my family. I can still be successful in the terms of really determined by the rest of society,
Yeah.
while I'm still living in the jungle. So now then all of a sudden you have this really cool footage that they record themselves on their phone, going
Yeah.
through the bushes with the animals, etc. So I feel like I think we're going to see more of that. And I'm excited
Yeah.
to help bring those voices to the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, I feel almost like the system let people down, and they realize that why should we sort of aspire to the system which doesn't care about us but only cares about the same repeated cycle of taking care of certain people when abandoning others, when we can go back to things and look at what we have within our own geography or within our own society or within our own history or tradition. And I think that's amazing because a lot of times, you know, I think there's so many good things each society, culture, civilization has, depending on where you live in the world. But you kind of get stereotyped, right? Like everyone's like, oh, right now the hot thing from South America is ayahuasca, and you just sort of talk about it like everyone's doing ayahuasca. But I'm sure there's a lot of good related to ayahuasca, but there's a lot more. Like as you just mentioned, like this plant that you can grow in your backyard. But I just want to understand what is, what just before we go into sort of the actual work you do, what is culturally when you go from South America to North America, how are you received? Are you received as an equal? Are you treated as a peer when it comes to your research, or are there still biases? Because I mean, I lived there. I had a great time. I have some great friends who live in America. I just want to understand, because I've never spoken to someone from South America about their experience, because it's the closest when it comes to, I mean, besides of course Canada, but we know that Mexican people from Mexico deal with a lot of bias against them. A lot of people from, say, Nicaragua, from Honduras deal with issues. So I just want to understand what someone from, like, say, Peru deals with when they go to study, not as an immigrant, if you want to call it, or as a refugee, but as a person who's gone on a student visa to get a degree.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I would say I came in really young. I was 18 when I moved, and the very first few, I guess, things that kind of shocked me a little bit, besides the food, because I was just so used to a whole different culture of food. In Peru, it's a culture, like it's a thing. Like there's even a saying that says Peruvians have the right to eat good. Like there's such a social gathering around food, which we also see in Europe, that wasn't necessarily part of the culture here. So that was as like part of my identity that I couldn't identify with. But that and the differences, even in saying hello, I think I went, and I think it also depends where you're in the US. I had my first move from Peru to the US was to this very small town in Tennessee, very, very small town. So
Oh, wow.
that was already a big change.
That was bold.
Yeah. I think it would have been perhaps different had I gone to a city like Miami or New York,
Yeah.
Let me close here. Anyways, so I wasn't aware of small cultural things that do make a big impact in your day-to-day, even how to say hello. I wasn't aware that in South America, the practice we have is not carried out everywhere in the world, right? We say hello with a kiss on the cheek or with a hug to strangers. I think the only person I had ever shake my hand to say hello was the principal in my school, like to that level.
Right.
Meanwhile, in the US, that's how you say hi to everyone. So that was if I think in a way it took me a while to get used to that, because it kind of create a sense of distance already immediately, and I
Yeah.
was just not used to that. But over time, you kind of like learn what the best practices are, because at the end of the day, my opinion is we should do our best to incorporate the culture, like into the culture that we are going into, right?
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
I don't need to be imposing myself in a new place where I'm going into. Now, in terms of my work, I would say, or even socially, the biases I may have seen mostly is assuming that I come from a specific place. Oh, you are this color, etc., so you're Mexican, right? I'm like, no,
Mm.
that's fine. But at the same time, I think that also depends in the city where you land, but it's been quite of a common denominator, and it's just me. I just take it as an approach, as a way, sorry, to teach people about Peru. I'm like, no, there's this
Yeah.
really cool country in South America. In
People
terms of
mistook me
my,
for a Mexican, so I think it's fine. People in I
I've
lived in,
gotten I've gotten Indian a lot as well.
okay. So
Yeah.
I think we're interchangeable. South American, Latin American, Indian.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
100%. Yes. And in terms of the science world, I think the more bias I got, even above the cultural and racial one, was in terms of my other interests outside of science, which were arts.
Mm,
I felt more of a bias in all the senses about the fact that I had a strong dance background and that I did dance professionally.
mm,
Whenever I enter into the more professional science world, that's when I at least that's when it impacted me personally. I feel like I tend to kind of like not really pay attention to if there's other biases, because I think that says more about the other person than me. So I was just kind
yeah.
of brought up with this mentality that it doesn't really need to impact me. So I think in a way, perhaps that's why I've been able to navigate all of the changes, especially at such a critical age for somebody getting developed inside themselves at 18. But I would say that that bias was definitely stronger.
No, that's a very important strength to have, and I think that's nice that you mentioned that, because in today's sort of context where everyone's trying to, instead of look at them selves from within and look at the internal dialogue that shapes them, which is the good, the bad, the ugly, the strength, the weakness, and sort of say, you know what other people say is not in my control, but I'm going to kind of focus on what I can do. Instead of doing that, people are just going to sort of look out at the world and blame the situation or blame what's external for their issues. And I think what you did is really strong, because you're like, you know what, this is who I am. But it's interesting that you mentioned that your bias was mainly because you're coming into the space of science as a dancer, and that's something which I think, while I don't undermine the bias, I say it's interesting, because it's more of something which to do with your choice, right? Which is, as opposed to how you were born, which I think is quite an interesting thing to deal with. Because so would you say that people took you less seriously, or was it more of a sort of strength that you could display, saying, hey, you know what, this person is an amazing dancer, at the same time she really wants to sort of explore this idea of chemical biology? So, or how was it like, were you kind of doing this balancing act?
I think you can relate that type of bias to a lot of the feminist bias that a lot of women get.
Okay.
Because I've definitely seen this with a lot of the younger female that I mentor, and they definitely feel that, even
Mm.
though necessarily, they don't come from a dance background.
Mm.
In my specific case, I think it was a combination of like, yes, I don't take you seriously, or like, I don't understand why you are even trying to get into the science world,
Mm.
or almost like, well, if you're doing this, then it makes no sense that you're doing that. And this type of incongruence that kind of happened in a lot of people that I met, I feel like it definitely resonated with how they treated me or approached me in terms of the science world. Now, what I would also say is that, despite of the fact that that was not necessarily a bias based on where I was from or what color I am, and etc., it still has the same level of impact, I feel like,
Yeah.
or it can have, right? Because it definitely sheltered me and like made me kind of go into like a little bit of a cage for a little while, where I was literally
Mm.
trying to keep those parts of my life separate.
It
When
puts
you
you on the
think about it,
defensive. Yeah, yeah.
yes, 100%. And it takes your desire to interact with some people away, which is detrimental to the career where you need to be networking as well. Now, what I would say is, the biggest thing I've learned is that if you just keep showing up with work, they can have all these biases, but at the end of the day, your work is what talks. And even though
Yeah.
it may take a little longer to get there because of those biases,
But it's a
I
bit
feel like,
tiring. It's
yeah.
a bit tiring every day trying to sort of, it's one more, I wouldn't say a hurdle, but it's one more thing to think about, right?
Yeah, it's definitely one more thing to think about. It also showed me that I was looking at the wrong places. It also showed me that the people that I was getting those biases with wasn't people I should be working with. And then
Nice. Yeah. Yeah.
the people that, kind of welcome that and kind of like really help me become more comfortable with that part of myself is the people I want to be working with. And it has shown, it's proven right time and time again. So now I almost use it as a filter to decide
Right.
like who I collaborate with.
It's a good way to gauge people. Yeah. If you just break that as a conversation starter and they're like, what? And you're like, nah, I'm going to move on. But
Yeah.
did it ever flip? Did anyone in the world of dance treat you differently because you're a scientist? Like, did you ever experience that?
Um, I would say perhaps they would assume that I was, I knew everything about the body, like medicine of the body,
Okay. Okay.
just because I was in the
It's
science world.
interesting how the art world perceives some biases more positively and the science world looks at art biases
Yes,
more negatively.
yes, that's a great way to put it. It was more of a positive bias. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, thank you. I'm not there, but I appreciate it.
You
Yeah,
must
it
have
was a
been,
positive bias.
yeah, you must have been really popular in the dance troupe. No worries, if anything happens to us, we have Rosa to help us.
I only have CPR training, but yeah, I think that I had never heard it put like that. That's a beautiful way to put it. It was a positive bias. Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about for people who haven't come across your work. Can you just explain to them, because I know you're a chemical biologist, you're an artist, as you mentioned. So maybe just to get the conversation started in this direction, what do you do, and maybe when did you get started on it?
So I explore the micro world in the jungle and other extreme environments too, but most of my work is focused on the Amazon rainforest. And by micro worlds, I study all the way from extreme forms of microbes to Amazonian stingless bees, so tiny creatures. My main goal with chemical biology is how can we understand the genetics and the chemistry of all of these often ignored tiny organisms that we have around us that play such an important role to maintain life
Yeah.
around different areas. How can we use that to help us not only learn and expand our knowledge, but also to protect nature better? In my opinion, there has been a big gap in biodiversity conservation, which is focused on the macro forms of life, what you can see with your naked eye.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, tiny beings are just as critical for the proper conservation of an area. So that's where I want to take my work. And at the same time, while you start unravel all these data, you start to learn about potential new medicines, potential new tools for greener methods for agriculture and chemistry. So it's almost a win-win. And I feel like we need to put more chemical biology in other areas where we haven't put chemical biology. That led me to collaborate with National Geographic and become an explorer with them a few years ago, which was on its own a life-changing experience. And it also brought me into a new parallel career, I want to say, which is science communication now. And like I mentioned, I did used to do dance professionally. I still do it as a hobby. And more importantly, I think I like to say that I'm more of an artist that was trained like a scientist. I think mind-wise, I've always naturally gravitated to that, but I'm just fascinated by the science world. So whenever I do projects in education right now, I work a lot with younger children. I try to bring all of that in towards teaching science. So how can you use art and not just as a way to share communication or share messages, but to be integrated?
It's fascinating you talk about this because we are just coming out of this pandemic where clearly one of the reasons, if you believe into conspiracies and the other reasons, but if you just look at the basic, maybe if you believe the popular sentiment, it's about humans sort of interfering with the environment, which results in evolving viruses that manipulate themselves to sort of infect humans. But from what you're talking about, these systems, these microbes, have been in place for centuries, and human beings have coexisted with them in various shapes and forms when it comes to tribes of the Amazonian tribes, or it comes to other groups in Africa, or it comes to other groups in Asia. But clearly there's been an imbalance. But just the other day I was reading about how there's this new sort of project which is being proposed to sort of get minerals from the deep ocean, which has never been explored. And a lot of the approaches earlier have been brash, right? We just go kind of ruin the environment, then in hindsight go back going, we shouldn't have probably done that, you know? So the thing is that the people are like, obviously, when there's a country which is really poor and there's a huge mining company that says, no, you have really good resources under your ocean beds, which is about 60, 70 kilometers. They're like, you know what? I need to feed my population today, not think about the generations 200 years down the line. And this, I'm not, this obviously I'm kind of surmising in a very, very layman's point. But when you are faced with this and trying to explore something, which of course sounds beautiful, like let's protect the Amazon, right? But it's not just one giant forest, it's layered, it's got human elements, it's got animals, it's got these various millions of plant species, these microbes. So I don't think I have a question here. Usually I don't have a question. I just kind of keep rambling and then I kind of arrive at some point. But where do you start with something like this? How do you focus your study? Because you said you're looking at the microbes and their potential chemical and medicinal benefits. But what is something that immediately you can relate to on a level of thing? Is it a cure for a disease? Is it a certain compound that is missing, an undiscovered compound that could change or revolutionize medicine? So what was your starting point?
It is a very complex area, right? Just like you said, and it's not just the nature aspect of it, it's the communities. And you said something so on point, which is people need to feed their families today, not tomorrow, not in a year, today. Right. And that's something that needs to be so taken into account when we talk about fragile ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest, because we cannot just go and point fingers and be like, oh, some of the locals are cutting their own trees. They just are ignorant. They just don't know. They don't see, we know better. But I am from my apartment in Michigan. I feel like we need to have more local experiences to actually understand and integrate the culture into the work that we do, and realize that at the end of the day, everybody needs to fulfill their human basic needs. So with that in mind, my first approach into the Amazon work actually started years ago, when I was around 15, and I had started to travel all across the Amazon just to try to connect with people that were doing science and education and communities. I just wanted to understand what was known, because at that time, for a variety of random events in my life, I came to the thought that we didn't know much about the microbes in the Amazon. I just was looking on the internet and there was barely to known information. I'm talking, that's like 15 years ago or so. And so that the first connection I had was with a scientist that allowed me to collaborate with him to do a chemical profile on a medicinal insect that communities have been using, but the use of this insect wasn't really properly documented yet. So that kind of brought me into this world of like, oh, we can, find not just nutritional value, but the medicinal value, which was part of my first proposal with National Geographic, to look at this extreme river. It's a boiling river that it's placed in the middle of the jungle, and it happens to be in one of the areas most heavily hit by deforestation. So it's like extra fragile. But nobody had looked at its microbiome yet. So the idea was, well, if we can do all of this work, meaning conservation, chemistry, etc., in such a fragile environment, hopefully we can use that information to strengthen the conservation policies and laws around it. And then this could be replicated in other areas. Now, in terms of the science itself, because there's nothing known about it, my first idea was, which is actually we're completing it within the next few months, to create a microbial map. The idea being, well, there's many possibilities. There's a possibility to find one microbe and perhaps use it to develop a tool to help us with PCR, which is, we have PCR now thanks to an extreme microbe first found in Yellowstone boiling waters in the US. So with that same analogy, we could just explore this extreme environment that happens to be in a high biodiversity space like the Amazon rainforest. But that's one avenue. Another avenue is we now know that some microbes can make potential powerful medicines, and we can obtain those in a in a sustainable way, because we don't need to be chopping down trees to be able to get that medicine. So that's another one. There's so many avenues, and I could dive farther into all of them, but the first goal is that we don't know what's there. So with my work, we want to first establish that. I believe that there's amazing, capable scientists, both locally and internationally, that could take the work in so many directions. And hopefully we're also going to take it in so many directions as well. But my main goal is to let's make it achievable for somebody to then continue to do more in this space. So creating a microbial map and starting to develop hypotheses as to we believe these ones have the most potential to produce new medicines. We believe that these ones have the most relevance in terms of the ecological importance of the area. And by being able to draw all of these connections, then hopefully inviting more scientists to join us, because it's such a big effort. One person or one team absolutely cannot do it all.
Yeah.
And then now in my more newer projects, so that was more related, with the conservation, but then the more time I spend in the jungle, and that goes back to the first idea I mentioned, which is we need to think that everybody at the end of the day is a human, and we need to fulfill our basic needs. So with that idea in mind, how now do you make it relevant to the local people and be able to use this information not only to expand science and allow for more collaborations and bring in more local scientists, but how do you actually help build a sustainable system of economy for the locals? So then they get encouraged as well to protect the area even more, because at the end of the day, if you need to put family food in your table, and somebody's offering you money to cut this one tree, but there you have no other offer, what do you do, right? Meanwhile, you can create new channels. So then saying hey, actually, if we're able to protect this area, you can gain this income. So all of a sudden there is an extra motivation, besides the fact that they need to protect their own land, right? This is the Amazon jungle. It looks like such a foreign space for most of us, but it is people's homes. That's literally their own backyards, that it happens to be big and so important for the world. And on the more newer project, it's that we're studying Amazonian stingless bees. We did saw an opportunity to make it more tangible for the local families, where now we are doing, also trying to create a microbial map and looking at the chemistry of the honey that these stingless bees are making, but with the purpose not only of expanding science and yes, bringing collaboration and then the conservation side, but now it can serve as a basis for them to develop a sustainable economy, which is what we're working closely with my local colleagues on.
Yeah, it's quite a fascinating how exploitation works, right? Because it's so easy to say, why are people going and why are these tribes cutting down the trees? Because as you said, it's easy for them, it's easy for us to sit here and say, oh no, they got to protect what their ancestors gave them. But, it's just immediate needs versus heritage, right? But, the Amazon, of course, is huge, and many of us can't even sort of wrap our heads around it, because it goes across 3-4 countries, and maybe more, maybe less. I'm sorry, I'm a little off with numbers, maybe
8,
but 8 countries. Okay, so now you might be working with the team and the government that's really, really keen on sort of restorative practices and conservation attempts, and also maybe what is natural to your part or your country's part of the Amazon is very different from what Brazil's part of the Amazon has. So now when you have these things going on, but say the country next to you doesn't do anything at all, what tends to happen? I don't know if there's almost like if all 8 aren't in sync and making similar efforts to restore, and say for instance one country is really going out of the way to make sure that they understand, break down, catalog, preserve, etc. And then you have the other country, which is the other end of the spectrum, where they just complete deforestation, displacement of tribes, you have pollution of the water, you have all sorts of things which are obviously opposite of what you're trying to do. How does that sort of represent itself in the habitat? If I don't know if that's it's a question.
I think on one side it creates some sort of an imbalance in the knowledge that we have, which is going to inform the practices that we do around it. So I think that is the main disadvantage that I see. I mean, just an example, in a way, Peru made it really difficult for scientists to come in and study the area, really difficult. And I'm glad I experienced that, trying to access that world of getting permits to do work from the US, because it allowed me to see what internationals have to go through to be able to study an area. And I I'm such a big motivator of like, we need more locals doing work, but I also inherently have got to acknowledge that we need collaborations with international institutions that have access to perhaps different machines that we don't. That's just the reality of it. We need in tandem work. So I think because of that, there was a lack of information that we had on the Amazon rainforest on Peru versus other countries. Just to give you an example, most of the Amazonian containing countries have an atlas of the pollen derived from Amazonian stingless bees. They basically have that catalog so that it can help identify the type of species or the honey, and it creates some sort of a metric for the pollen and even its consumption. However, we actually still to date, we don't have that in Peru. There's an incredible local scientist that now is working on that, and she has collaborations with other institutions, so they're getting on it. But it shows you how some countries, exactly what you're talking about, some countries have been left behind. Now, in some areas, perhaps that doesn't really change much. It doesn't really impact anything. But now, let's say we were talking about, a hypothetical case, which is, well, actually not hypothetical. Bees are disappearing. We know that. But let's say there was something specific about the pollen. And let's say we made a policy all around based information that we know that is excluding Peru. Then all of the sudden, like, yes, different countries, the ecology is going to change slightly. You're going to have niche areas. But at the end of the day, the Amazon rainforest didn't used to have these delineations, these limits, right? It used to be the one thing. So at the end of the day, it's a condensed area.
So political boundaries didn't exist. I mean, the whole habitat is one. Yeah. That's interesting.
Exactly. So my question then to everybody is like, how it's almost as if you only know A to M in the vocabulary in the alphabet. You don't know all the way through C, but now you're trying to develop a class or a phrase only using that. You're missing out on a lot. So
and it almost feels like you kind of you make your perceived boundaries based on whatever you've decided is the geography that you control. But at the same time, these are much more ancient systems which are underground, which aren't separated by fences or by so-called physical boundaries, right? Like they go much deeper. But in a similar thing, you said something earlier, which is very interesting. A lot of the stuff you learn or which is passed on by these indigenous groups is done orally. Now, when you go in as a scientist, of course, there are scientific practices, right, which are based on proof, and you have to go through various levels of proof until something is tested, and then I don't know the scientific term for it, it's arrived at, and then it's approved, and it's gone into whatever stages, right? There are different things and different stages scientists go through. But is there a thing, because I've read and I've heard stories about how now certain things, like for instance, which were taught in yogic sciences 3,000 years, not yogic science, in yoga 3,000 years back, are now being proved by psychiatry, by medicine, in the conventional scientific way. Now, but when you go in as a scientist, while you're trying to empower the locals, I'm sure there are people within these tribes who have the knowledge. They might not know it in a conventional sort of cataloged way, but they know what this plant does, or they know in their context of information, they know how this thing works. So do you as a scientist, or do your colleagues consult these people when you're discovering microbes, their potential, plants, their potential, or is it straight like, let's just exclude it and get the scientific information alone, or is it a combined effort?
It depends, I would say. So for the boiling river work with the extreme microbes, we decided to do it in an independent way, and then share all of the results and see what comes up in terms of similarities. So we tried to do it in a more independent manner because we wanted to be unbiased as to where we were sampling, getting the samples from, so that we didn't have this like, well, we know that there's more medicinal stuff here and we only sample there. Because when we talk about the microscopic world, we know so little in the Amazon rainforest about it that I feel like if we only do that bias approach, we would be missing out on a lot, and perhaps the most important. Now, that's for that work. On the bee work, it's been a little bit different because my local colleague has been working with the communities for a long time. And the very first step in his approach was to collect the information that ethnobotanical practices already do. So he went on an interview and cataloged that interview on like, how do you use the honey? How do you prepare it? What type of conditions do you use it for? What have been your experiences? And having all of that information, putting out in a scientific way and sharing the results with them. So working really closely with the community, and also not just sharing what, the different communities do to each of the communities, but also encouraging them to use that information whenever they are, teaching others about their bee practices or even selling their own honey as well. So using it as a tool in empowerment. Now, for the work that we are doing with the Amazonian communities, we're getting started, but we're working closely with a few families right now. When the goal is going to be like we know what species of native bees they are focusing on because they claim that they make the most potent honey. So we're starting to look at those. So it is a bit more of a bias and working closely with them when they're not only like we are coming and taking samples and being like, now this is what we do, but it's a conversation because it's not about, I don't necessarily believe in like, oh, we need to empower them. They actually are empowering us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. No, because it seems like there's so much, right? I mean, I have absolutely very little information when it comes to medicinal thing, but I've heard of things like psilocybin, or you heard of certain mushrooms or certain fungi which are helping people with depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. But when you present these findings, say to panels or whoever you present it to, sorry if I'm coming across as ignorant, but I just it seems like a lot of companies or corporations, pharmaceutical, just take and run with it. And then the next thing you know, they go after the source and say, you know what, we don't care about the preservation of these environments. We don't care about the depth and the scope, and there's so much more than we can benefit by sustaining. But let's just take this one aspect of it and run and exploit. I'm not talking about the people alone. I'm talking about the environment or whatever that particular molecule or the chemical may be. So when you have such a wide possibility or set of possibilities when it comes to maybe a honey that is good, but it might not be scalable, how do you present your findings without being terrified that people are going to take that and take all the good work you've done and use it for bad or use it for profit alone?
I think that's when communication and sharing knowledge with the communities is the most critical. Because at the end of the day, I'm just a channel. That's how I see myself, of doing work and communicating, but they're the ones daily with the bees in the area and practicing it.
Yeah.
So they need to be the ones in charge to make that decision. And they know what they need. I won't know better. They absolutely will know better. So I think it's about, we haven't put out the work out there. It's definitely a concern, but at the same time, I think that because of concerns like that, we have been withdrawn from learning more about the jungle. And so I think that my goals, and I know that that's part of their dreams as well, is that the sale of the honey first becomes normalized. So right now they can only sell it in local farmers markets. They cannot in jungle. They cannot even ship it outside of the city because there's no really sanitary protocols associated. There's even none at all. Like we only have sanitary protocols for the stinging bee honey, the one that we're all familiarized with.
Right.
But there's none for native bees. So I feel like that would be a big success, and hopefully our work is pushing towards that direction, because it would allow the communities to be able to increase the price of the honey and being able to really ship it anywhere and increase their production within themselves. Now, in terms of companies, I think, to be honest, they are some of the smartest people that I've talked to, and I feel like if they have a strong idea on what the work it's doing and what is catalyzing, then they will be able to make the right decisions. And we're there every step of the way so that we could also help filter that as well. And I feel like that a lot of the production companies, they perhaps will try to focus only in areas that are really easily accessible. However, something that we're seeing is that the areas that are easily accessible, some areas don't even have native bees anymore. I've actually run into some communities, elderly people that have lived for the entire time in an area that's already been, tackled by deforestation for a long time. They have not seen native stingless bees ever. To me, that was shocking. So now we need to go into these deeper areas, which there's no routes to it. That's why not many people do this work. You need to be in a boat for like 12 hours on end in a rainy day, and it's dangerous and it's consuming, and it's not productive towards a commercial aspect yet, which is, I think, in a way it's going to be detrimental to production companies wanting and coming to take over, because it's going to be way too much money. But at the same time, I hope it will encourage facilitating from the government, at least, to build better transportation channels, and just at least bringing that attention and getting it going, and just doing our best to monitor and keeping everything balanced. I think there's definitely more. The government is doing a better job, at least in Peru, to be aware of what can we do and when can we not. And they are definitely very strict on those aspects, and they are in close communication with the communities. And I feel like if you combine that with the scientific evidence that us and other local scientists can bring, then we can stand up a little stronger than we could have 10 years ago.
Which is so encouraging to hear, because I think sometimes we lose perspective on how, first of all, I think these are such ancient jungles and ecosystems, and we kind of try to put it in perspective of our limited experience on this planet. I'm saying me as a 39-year-old, I'm just like, or whoever it may be. And little do we know how long they've survived and evolved over these thousands of years and hundreds of thousands of years. But and in that context, sometimes you hear the media reporting it, and maybe it's biased, maybe it's unbiased, who knows what the motivation behind the reporting is. But it just seems all just so bleak. Like it's you just hear about, if you go to one source, it's, oh, that's it. It's the end of the planet. And you go to another source, like, no, it's all misinformation. You got another source, it's like Greta Thunberg is doing something. So how bad is it really, from someone who's been on the ground? And what is the sort of things you've seen that have deteriorated, but at the same time, have you seen things that have also given you hope?
Both. It is worse. It is worse than what it sounds. It is terrifying. The numbers are not too accurate, I would say. They're as accurate as they can be, I understand. But I definitely think it's worse than when it's being reported, because not all the losses are being reported. We haven't even heard about the story I just told you about elderly haven't ever seen native stingless bees because they live in such a area, in such a deforested area for so long. We don't hear those stories. And I think that's really a testament of, we only, even in the news, when I come into the American news, and like I try to like, oh, what are people talking about the jungle? All we hear is these big numbers of deforestation that then just don't make it tangible for us, or how it impacts the daily people. The biggest changes I've seen over the last, since I'm 15 to now close to 30, it's even the climate change. We see the impacts everywhere. But when you are talking about an area where to get from community to community, or even to go to the market or to the main city where you can buy supplies and etc., sometimes it takes longer than 12 hours on a boat. Sometimes you actually need to do a day. Sometimes you need to do a day, stop somewhere else, and then keep on going on a boat. And I'm talking, most people are going to have a small, not even motorized boat sometimes, that, if there's too much rain one day, you just simply cannot, or you will fall. So I feel like when we say climate change, we are already having a big impact ourselves. Like I feel, extra hot in the summers, extra cold in the winters, but I can still go inside my home where I can regulate the temperature and be comfortable.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen there. That you're entirely dependent on how the day goes. And perhaps now with increased rains, the houses are actually getting destroyed faster. And it's getting more complicated for people to get from area to area. So that makes it more difficult to get even food that perhaps you cannot get in your local spaces anymore, because now it's so dry, it's not raining enough, or it's actually raining too much that things are not growing where you usually were able to rely on your own produce. So I feel like there's a lot of these impacts that we're not hearing, which show that it's worse. It's definitely terrifying. Like I see the numbers. There was just one of the latest UN reports on basically biodiversity in general. It shows that people are already, always saying like, oh, we need to do something. It's at the tipping point. I think we're past that. I think now we just need to remediate as much as we can and then quickly and we can. It's not about like, oh, we can do that. We still have like 5 years to start acting really strong. We are beyond that point. Things are getting worse faster than people had even predicted. But with that being said, what does make me really hopeful is to see younger people wanted to, especially in the local areas where I work, wanted to be involved and to have a voice, and they are growing up with all of these changes that we're talking about. Not, in my case, I'm seeing it now as an adult. I was able to still enjoy the jungle 15 years ago or 20 years ago or more, when it was a different space, but now they're growing up with it. So I feel like the sense of commitment and responsibility and like, greed of like, I need to do this now, it's even stronger in younger people, everywhere. I see it everywhere where I work, really. I'm working closely with a fourth grade, fifth grade classroom in Idaho, and I see it in them, and they definitely see it in the locals as well. And despite of some areas being so remote, we still have some internet access, not reliable, not always, but some. And I think by having more big organizations wanting to give voice and a platform to local people, then we can facilitate slightly bigger improvement in all areas. Let's face the truth, we're not going to be able to save all of the jungle. That's the absolute truth. We're not actually going to be able to save most of the tropical rainforests. And as devastating as it sounds, I think we are with the capability to protect a big part of it. So
and that's thanks to people like you. Yeah.
Thank you. That's what gives people.
No, it's really amazing, because it's such, I wouldn't say thankless work, but it's such long timelines, right? It's not something that you can see tomorrow. It's not something that you can tell a friend over dinner, like, oh, you know what I found today? I found the cure from the Amazon. It takes so much time. It takes so much. It's such an uphill battle. It's so many odds that you have to fight against, but you still do it. And I think I'd like to thank you, and I think I salute the work that you do, Rosa, and thank you so much for coming here today and sharing everything with people listening and with me. And for people who are interested to reach out to you, and I was telling my niece is 16, she'll be 16 in August, and she's just writing her GCSE exams, and she loves biology and chemistry. And I said I was going to get you on the podcast, and I said, if you really are keen, someday you can maybe go do an internship with Rosa. Yeah, she'd love to.
I have an NGO in Peru, and I definitely take young interns because I know it's hard to get experience sometimes in labs. I have one in Peru, so please have her reach out to me.
I'll do that. And the best part is that she's learning Spanish, so she's really yeah. So she'll be in touch with you. I'm pretty sure she's really sort of loves animals and the environment, and I'll put her. Hope we'll stay in touch. But for people who want to reach out to you and to your organization, or to follow you, if you could just drop your social media handles, which of course I will put in the link at the description as well. But if there's anything you'd like to direct them towards, I'd really appreciate it if you could share that now.
Yeah, so I'm trying to be more active, on social media. You can find me everywhere with Rosa V Espinoza, V from Vasquez, which is how I go in my publications as well. I'm most active on Instagram, trying to be more active on TikTok,
right?
Sometimes on Twitter and Facebook, but Instagram is the place to find me. And also my website goes with the same handle, rosavespinoza.com. Okay. I'm trying to keep everyone updated over there. And yes, please reach out. I have my emails over there. I tried my best to keep up with messages on social media, whether it's to give voice to somebody or some story that is important that should be shared. I also try to do lives from time to time with people that work or live in the jungle to highlight stories that don't make it to the media. So thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been fantastic.
My pleasure. And thank you, I think, on behalf of everyone listening, for doing what you do, and keep up the super work, and all the best with your discoveries and your cures for mankind.
Thank you so much. You're very kind, and good luck with your new little girl.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Rosa.